Hey everybody, Sam and Cole podcast here, January 21st, 2015. We're presented by the High Intensity Training Center of Jacksonville. I was in there the other day, Cole, and I'll let you in a little secret. You know who I ran into in there? Of all people. You wouldn't even know he lived here. Corey Kubler, American League Cy Young Award winner. Been working out in there for a year and a half. Lives in Jacksonville.
Why does he live in Jacksonville?
He married a girl from here.
Oh, there you go.
And and just just his work, and I mean, it's no surprise. When you apply the metrics, I mean, Kubler was an easy winner in the American League, but still, it's just amazing to see the guy work out, and he's the guy. I mean, it's not like he's trying to be. He already is the guy.
Yeah.
And he just some of the stuff that he does, but that's the kind of person you might run into, and you also might run into somebody who's just getting into fitness. So High Intensity Training Center across the board has it for you. $99 boot camps, all the toys you can imagine right there on Route 1 near the avenues across the street from Steak and Shake. As I mentioned, this is the 21st of January, which means it's a Wednesday, which means it's day 2 of practice over at the Senior Bowl, Cole, and the Jaguars have announced that they have finally hired 2 coaches, Doug Marrone, who's an assistant head coach and an offensive line coach, and they've hired Greg Olson back as their offensive coordinator. 2 interesting hires. I mean, I don't know what Marrone's doing. I mean, did he think he was going to get the New York job and just interviewed terrible and didn't get it?
I don't know why he didn't get it, but every indication is that's the reason he was bailing on the Buffalo job.
Right.
Which, by the way, kudos to him for building that, or his agent for building that out into his contract. That's shrewd. But
so did he get $4 million and still was able to walk away?
Yeah. By the way, I will go ahead and say, any NFL team that wants me to leave for only $2 million, I'm willing to do that.
That's just amazing.
Huh? And I guess he's a good coach. I don't know how good a head coach he is, but he's certainly a good football coach. Whether he's a good head coach or not is another thing. And I think
as an offensive line coach, I think this is somebody they need. I think that we overlooked the fact that George Arno was not there all last year, and that obviously his health is not good, and Luke Butkus was an assistant there, not that far removed from trying to play the game himself, and it's a technique. There's a lot of things that go into, I think, being the offensive line coach, and I think Marrone is a significant person now on that staff.
I've often thought that the most important position coach in the National Football League is not the quarterback's coach, because the offensive coordinator can do a lot of the things with the quarterback can, but it is the offensive line coach, because you're dealing with 5 guys who have to work as a unit more than any other unit on the field. You've got more of them, first of all, than you have on the defensive line or defensive backfield, linebackers, what have you. And they have to work together, and nobody's going to get any credit for it. I mean, it's a really terrific offensive line coach can make a difference, I think, more than any other position coach probably at any spot in the National Football League. And I think Doug Marrone is going to come out of this looking great, because there's almost no chance that the Jaguars' offensive line plays worse than they did in 2014. This is like coming in and you're taking over a basketball team that didn't have anybody over 6'5" last year, and now you have a couple of guys 6'7" and a 6'10" guy coming in. All right, he's automatically.
Are you saying he's trying to sell beer to America?
Well, right, or baseball to St. Louis. I'm just saying, yes. For instance, I think he's going to be in such a great position here, and maybe he'll get a head coaching job after that. And what his duties are specifically as the assistant head coach, I mean, that varies widely in terms of what that position means. But I think he's going to be in a great position. Hiring somebody who's an experienced, who has experience being a head coach, certainly is going to help Gus Bradley as well, to have somebody who's been in that position, another guy on his staff. I think the Greg Olson hire is intriguing to me. Mm-hmm. I really like Greg a lot. I think he's a very straightforward guy. He was the quarterback's coach in the Mike Mularkey year, And as you know, I was working on the Jaguars radio network at the time. Had a lot of conversations with Greg. I think he's got a great perspective on things. I think he knows the quarterback position. And again, this is just from the conversations that we had. Everything that you would look at Blaine Gabbert and say, why isn't he doing this? Somebody needs to be doing this to get him to do this stuff. Greg Olson was doing that stuff.
Was trying to, yeah.
And Gabbert wasn't responding.
Right. We showed tape of that today, and it was fascinating, bothering him, standing there, clipping his arm, trying to hit the ball, hitting him in the back of the head. I mean, just all kinds of things that Gabbert just didn't respond to. You're right. You think there's anything to the Jaguars, and particularly in Gus Bradley? I mean, this is now his third year. In his first year, he only had 30 days to put together a staff. Is there anything to kind of revamping the staff, building some depth in the staff itself as you build a team? I mean, there's a guy, Doug Marrone, who, as you just said, I think brings a certain gravitas to the table because he was a head coach, and I think players recognize when the staff is a little more established. You go back to those years where it was Chris Palmer and Dick Geron, Kevin Gilbride.
Wasn't it Del Rio who had like 7 guys who had been head coaches at some point?
Coaches. Yeah. The problem, Del Rio was the problem, though.
Well, again, and we don't think it's Gus Bradley, although
right, we don't know.
We don't know for sure yet.
It's still in it.
We think predominantly the problem is one of talent and youth rather than of coaching, right? I mean, I think most people would say that's probably more likely than it is, coaching and approach. But I think it helps to have that. Some guys just have a knack for not only identifying coaching talent, but identifying a guy who will fit in well. And so far, I think you would say that Gus Bradley's assistant coaching hires have been a C at best. There hasn't, you wouldn't say, oh boy, he unearthed this guy and knocked it out of the park, or that's because the team hasn't had success, and again, some of that maybe on coaching and approach and so forth. He's had some positive hires. He's had a few negative hires. He's had some hires that, like George Yarno that were, act of God kind of thing beyond his control. So I think we're still trying to really assess whether Gus Bradley's the guy who has a knack for finding those right coaches or finding those coaches who really fit in.
I do think that I agree with you with Greg Olson. I think that he's a good developmental guy. I don't know that he's going to bring any Bill Walsh stuff to the to the table, reinventing the West Coast offense, whatever they're going to do. But I do think that he's the right guy at this time in the right situation.
Well, he's also a quarterback-focused guy,
right?
As an offensive coordinator, who's going to be working with the most important player to develop on your team in Blake Bortles.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, like you just said, it's still kind of a crapshoot. You really don't know. And, he's put together these guys. I wonder if Frank Selfo will keep his job, because I suppose that these are guys that will make up their own mind. A guy like Olson will decide whether or not Selfo is the right guy to be the quarterback's coach.
Well, will he, though? I mean, does he get to make that call? I mean,
I think if he went to Gus and said, "Hey, I want to bring in so-and-so," I think he might. But I don't know. Selfo seems to be a guy who's pretty popular, and has worked. I think has done some individual things with Blake that are very positive things. The things that Blake needs, Selfo is the guy that he was having work on. So to me, I think that's a plus.
By the way, one of the interesting things to follow here is that one of the reasons purportedly why Jed Fish was let go is because of the way he managed Blake Bortles' kind of psychology.
Right.
It's going to be interesting because Olson certainly has the ability to be, a stick or carrot guy. And he tried both with Gabbert and a lot of stick, and it didn't take. So it's going to be interesting to see how he and Bortles connect And because, again, that's going to be – I think that hire of Greg Olson is probably the most important hire that Gus Bradley will have made in his career as a head coach. Because if it's the right guy, it gives Gus a chance to start establishing himself because the quarterback will establish himself and the defense is already showing improvement, and he'll have a chance to have a long career as a head coach in Jacksonville. If it's the wrong guy, if it's the wrong mix, then this time next year – he might be looking for a defensive coordinator spot somewhere.
Very good point. Interestingly enough, you mentioned Blake Bortles in the offseason. Blake in Orlando today said that he's pretty excited about both of these guys, mainly because Chad Henne knows Olson, and Derek Carr knows Olson, obviously, and so he said, I already talked to both of those guys, and both of them really like him and feel like he can do a lot. Blake also said he's taken a couple of weeks off where he hasn't done a lot of hard working out, but next week he's moving to San Diego, basically for most of the offseason, to work with some quarterback specialists out there, quarterback gurus, if you will, with some other quarterbacks.
Why are they all in California? Why is every quarterback guru in California?
Because the weather is so good all the time.
I guess.
And I don't know who he's going to work with. I have to find out. But you've seen that one guy that's out there that puts guys on the beach and in the sand and in the surf and has them do very specific kind of drills. And this is the kind of stuff that Jed Fish had talked about, that he was excited for Blake, in that this offseason he'll have a chance to do a lot of that stuff. Work. He's in the fraternity. He talked to Mark Brunell. I talked to Matt Robinson, both NFL quarterbacks. We talked specifically about once you're in that fraternity, in the off season, it's not competitive. You share every secret. You talk about how you can make yourself better. You work out with other guys and
talk about how much you want to inflate footballs in the course of the game
and all that. By the way, the quarterbacks that I spoke to today, who have had a history in the league, not a single one of them said that it surprised them that Tom Brady and the Patriots are perhaps being accused of that.
Why would it surprise anybody? And by the way, it does make a difference in terms of grip and in that weather that it was in New England on a kind of a cold, clammy, wet day, to have a ball that gives a little bit. Sam, as you know, you've thrown a lot of footballs through the years.
Yeah, if the ball was deflated, Cole, I could probably still wing it 70 yards. But that thing, and you talk to guys about the change in the rule when they used to just make the referee handle the ball and bring it to the game, and he didn't want to do that. So basically, the balls came right out of the box. It was like kicking a brick. It was so slick you could barely handle it. Now, under the pressure from Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, in 2006, I think it is, the rule was changed to allow the visiting team to bring their own balls so they wouldn't be subjected to whatever the home team did with the ball. So there's some, there's some validity there. I don't understand why a guy like Tom Brady would not have the same. Why the referees don't have the same ball played by both sides? Do you get your own ball? Guess you do.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And in fact, you've seen these balls with the Jaguars. It actually has emblazoned right underneath the equator. Says
Jaguars. Yeah, it says right on there.
Yeah, so you know which team's ball it is, and then you know whether it's a K ball or not, a kicking ball. So
kicking ball.
Anyway,
it's not like the Raiders, who used to keep a microwave on the sideline when it was cold.
Yeah,
and a little helium pump over there too, just in case.
Ray Guy
or anybody else needed a little help. But
you remember there was a college football game. It was a kickoff classic, I think, between West Virginia and Nebraska. It had to be 18 years ago, probably. And Todd Sauerbrunn put on the most impressive punting performance I ever remember. This was a hot day in New York, so the ball was really carrying, first of all. Sauerbrunn was very strong and later was found to have been doing a lot of steroids. And he averaged like 70 yards a punt that day, something ridiculous like that. And people started, and the first thing that people said, I wonder if he's putting helium in that ball. And no, the ball wasn't juiced. Todd Sauerbrunn was juiced, but there's always, everybody's looking for an edge, and there's no team since Al Davis was alive and sane, who has looked for more of an edge in more different ways than Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots.
Agreed, and I'll be very interested to see what the league comes up with. I heard so many dribs and drabs of information that the balls were reinflated at halftime. Well, if that's the case, it was the second half that was the blowout in that game.
Yep.
I don't think there's any question that there was that it would be an advantage. It would be an advantage.
You're a Hall of Fame voter. You're on the Hall of Fame committee.
Mm-hmm.
Does this stuff and Spygate and the other things, is that going to impact decisions or the conversation at all for guys like Brady or Belichick when they come up as Hall of Fame candidates, or anybody else who played on these teams? When it rolls around, is that even going to be brought up in that room?
Absolutely will be brought up. What effect it'll have, I think, is very little. But absolutely will be talked about. There are certain voters who have already said that, Belichick will never get their vote because he's Belichick. And that whole thing with that whole Spygate thing is just a blatant disregard for the rules. Now, this is something that no coach would know anything about this. This is, as John Madden said tonight, quarterback driven. If this is the case, it's quarterback driven.
Yeah, sure isn't kicker driven, by the way.
Right. It's not kicker driven. It's not done by the equipment guy without either the consent, knowledge, or encouragement of the quarterback. So, I do think that there is an easy explanation. 55 degrees when they filled the balls, 55 degrees when they checked it, 41 degrees as the game went on. General use of the ball during a game is liable to bring it down. And if they were instructed to fill the ball to the minimum amount, which I think is 12.2 psi, then it's very possible it could get into the 11s by halftime or whatever, based on how the ball was being used both in warm-ups and during the game.
You say that, but then why were 11 out of 12 low and the other one was fine? Never used?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a little bit of a scientific anomaly.
But I don't know that the league, unless somebody has a mea culpa, I don't know that the league can come up with the right answer.
No, because until you find some evidence that it was done intentionally rather than otherwise, it's
with a certain amount of intent, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so you're heading to Arizona next week for the
I'm going out there to vote for the vote, and it's an interesting class because, and I'll just tell folks for instance, how difficult it is to figure this out fully, simply because currently there's a senior candidate, Mick Tingelhoff, who I think is a Hall of Famer. In addition to that, there are two senior candidates. Two contributor candidates this year. It's a different voting procedure. Both Ron Wolf and Bill Polian will get an up or down vote by the entire committee, which a lot of the committee was not happy about. That's how they were chosen by some executive committee. That they thought that those guys should be put on the main ballot the same way as everybody else in their own category, so that if they were worthy, according to the full committee, of consideration, then they would get there. But at this point, those are the guys who are who we're considering. But when you look at the Hall of Fame candidates this year, the statistic is about 87% of anybody who makes it to the final 15 is going to eventually get into the Hall of Fame. Right, about 87%.
So if they get down to the
final 15,
short list, yeah,
you've got to. It
may not be in the first year they get in, but at some point they'll go.
You've got a 4 and 5 chance of getting in. This is the book for those of you who are watching on Google. This is the book that they sent me with the accomplishments of the 15 guys. Of these guys, just at first glance, Morton Anderson, Jerome Bettis, Tim Brown, Don Coryell, Terrell Davis, Tony Dungy, Kevin Green, Charles Haley, Marvin Harrison, Jimmy Johnson, John Lynch, Orlando Pace, Bill Polian, Junior Seau, Will Shields, Mick Tingelhoff, Kurt Warner, and Ron Wolf. I think of those 18, I think it's 18 finalists.
Yeah.
Of those guys, you could make a case for all of them, and I can tell you off the top of my head, there's 15 guys here that I absolutely think are Hall of Famers. There's 3 guys probably would have to be convinced that you need to put them in the Hall of Fame. But there's 15 guys on this list that I would say they're a Hall of Famer.
And you've got
5 slots.
2, 3, 4. I think there are 4 of those who you can make the case were the best at their position in the last 20 years.
Right. I mean, to me, it's pretty simple. It's the second consecutive year, and being a Kansas City Chiefs fan, you know this. Will Shields is a Hall of Famer.
No, unbelievable, no doubt.
Right. Yeah. Hard to quantify in terms of what he did up front, but if you just kind of something about football, you talk to people close to the game, you realize, as you just mentioned, he might have been the best guard in the game for 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Morton Anderson might be the best kicker in the last
kicker of all
years.
Time.
Maybe Tim of Brown, all time.
Tim Brown has statistics to get in. I think that he's the kind of guy that I personally think he's a Hall of Famer because of the way he played, and he was willing to go back and do and return kickoffs and that.
And was very good for a long career. That matters.
Don Coryell has been a finalist before. Yeah. And to me, absolute Hall of Famer.
Yeah, how do you tell the story of the NFL without Eric Coryell?
Don Coryell changed how the game's played. Yep. Same argument you have so often. Terrell Davis didn't have a very long career, but the argument will be made for Terrell Davis about his postseason statistical comparison to everybody else. Yep. Tony Dungy was certainly an impact kind of guy and a groundbreaker. On a lot of levels.
Yeah, player,
there will
coach,
be a discussion.
Player,
player, coach, all that. Kevin Green is an unknown to so many people because they don't realize.
He was in Jacksonville this year, by the way. His son played on, and I'll try to remember which team it was. Played on a team that played against Bolles High School in football. And I went, as you know, I do the Bolles games on radio, and I was there, and I looked down on the field before the game. I was taking the gear upstairs, and I look over, and that guy looks a lot like Kevin Green. And I realized, it was. I think he plays for. I'll have to remember
one of the schools that came down.
Yeah,
really?
One of the out-of-town schools. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that guy has the 3rd most sacks in the history of the league. I mean, Charles Haley, terrible teammate, 5 Super Bowl rings. Marvin Harrison has more stats than just about anybody. Jimmy Johnson won 3 Super Bowls. John Lynch was considered to be the best safety for a while. Orlando Pace, many people thought, was the best left tackle in the game
one of those guys
for his entire career.
Yeah.
Right?
Junior Seau.
By the way, Orlando Pace and Tony Baselli should be on the same ballot, but Baselli's career was cut short. Junior Seau. Many people
been the best linebacker for 20 years.
Could have been the best linebacker. As I mentioned, Will Shields. Kurt Warner helped take two different teams to the Super Bowl. And when you do a statistical comparison between Kurt Warner and the other quarterbacks who are in the Hall of Fame, it's hard to make an argument that he doesn't deserve to be there. So,
and he'll get some nods too, based on the fact that he's, I think, helped his street cred a little bit in terms of because he's working as a broadcaster now. You can see a little bit of the personality in him. Yeah, and people know a little more about him. So, because before it was just a stock boy, crazy wife. Yeah, exactly. That was basically the barnstormer, stock boy, crazy wife, right? So, I'll go there, and it's a meeting on Saturday, and there'll be an incredible amount of discussion. Who's not on the list? Paul Tagliabue is not going to be discussed this year. Second consecutive year, he hasn't made it to the final 15. So there'll be some fascinating discussions, but we'll put 5 guys in. I'm confident, and to me, that's the only downside is if we don't, which would be ridiculous. But we'll put 5 guys in off that list, plus up and down
there's a possibility of 8, class of 8 this year.
Only up to 5 players
right.
that
plus
can be
Tingle
selected by the committee. Yeah.
Right. Plus Tingle. So we're talking about,
Well, it'll be something we'll certainly look forward to, without a doubt, and we'll talk more about that as we get closer. But that will do it here for the Sam and Cole podcast. As we wrap things up, Sam will go off and do TV, and I will call it an evening. We want to thank you. We're presented, as always, by the High Intensity Training Center, Phillips Highway, the fusion of sport and science. Great way to get the new year off to a good start in terms of your fitness level there at the High Intensity Training Center. For Sam Kavaris, who you can find on Twitter at Sam Kavaris. You can find me on Twitter at Cole Pepper. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on Stitcher, and you can follow us on social media as well. Thanks so much for joining us right here on the Sam and Cole podcast.